Okay. Can't use that no more. Making a game. Um, Let me know if it looks like shit. If I start explaining stuff, boom, 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 boom. Oh, that looks good. Um, I clearly changed it. Why the fuck is it still there? Uh,
You hold the button and then swing.
this is so confusing, yo. Software and game development. There you go. That's what I wanted it to be. Okay. Now I can open this up, open this up, and now we start brainstorming. One of the things that I want to do is figure out what exactly is it that I can do by myself. Um, so we're gonna undo this. We have to see what type of game that we want to make. Unreal Engine allows you to make a first person shooter, or first person, third person, top down, handheld, augmented reality, virtual reality, and car stuff. The main thing that I'm trying to do is make a game, but I need to figure out what it is that I want to do first. So we have to figure out if we're going to do first person or third person. Those are the two options. So first person or third. Need to figure that out. And then what is it going to look like? So that would be what's it called? Game. What does it look like? First person, third person, and I think third person is going to be the way it goes. What does it look like? And then it's going to be what is it going to be about? What is the game going to be about? Because what I'm thinking is like a Viking type. Maybe like a Viking type of game. Mm, what would be some good game ideas? Just throw anything out. Couple games. Um, I'd have to figure out if I want it in the first person or third person. What's it gonna look like? What's it gonna be about? But first things first. Let's uh let's watch this video. Let's watch this video first.
Hello everyone, if you are completely new to Unreal Engine 5, then this tutorial was made for you. In this tutorial, you will go from knowing nothing about Unreal Engine 5 to creating this beautiful world you see right here. Now, I know this might look intimidating, but do not worry. Every step in this process, from sculpting the landscape to creating the castle, will be shown in detail. This video is pretty long, but that's because Unreal Engine 5 is a big program, and we have a lot to cover. To help navigate this video, I divided it up into individual chapters. You can find links to all the chapters in the description below. In this tutorial, you will learn how to install Unreal Engine 5 and create a project, how to navigate and move objects.
Okay, there's certain things that I already know. So we're gonna uh, we'll skip that.
To begin, let's briefly go over how to navigate the user interface and what all these different windows do.
So what we're gonna do, we're just gonna go ahead and we're gonna most likely I'm gonna go to third person, so we're gonna create that Unreal editor. Okay, we'll do that.
Probably the window that sticks out the most is the viewport right here. The viewport is essentially just a view into our 3D world that we're creating. So, for example, we can fly around and look at our world. We can even grab objects and manipulate them, all within the 3D viewport. Now, don't worry, we are going to go over camera controls and how to move objects in just a bit, but I first want to go over what the different windows do. Right above the viewport is the toolbar. The toolbar is pretty important because it's where we get a lot of our tools and a lot of different buttons we're going to be continually pressing. For example, what if I want to add an object into our world? Then I can click on the plus icon and scroll down to shapes, and maybe I add in a sphere and place it in the world to move it around. I can also switch modes. So right now I'm in select mode, which is the main mode where we can move objects around. Let's say if I'm making a landscape, I can go into landscaping mode and create a landscape, or I can go into foliage mode and start to paint foliage if I do have those assets. If you are curious, we are going to go over both modes later in the video. Now to the right of that, we have the outliner. The outliner is essentially a list of all the objects that make up my current world. So for example, if I want to select a chair, but the chair isn't in my view right now within the outliner, I can select a chair right there like that. I can also select multiple objects by holding down control. So maybe I want to select both chairs, just hold down control like that, and maybe also the statue right there. The outliner is also a great place to organize your world. For example, we see we have all these folders. Real quickly, if you want to create a folder, all you have to do is right click, create folder, Let's call this one my folder, and holding down control, let's select both chairs and simply drag them into there just like this. We can also hide and unhide objects. For example, maybe I want to edit something that's behind the table, but the table's in the way right now. I can come here and temporarily click on the eye icon to hide the table, and then click on the eye icon again to unhide it. And right below the world outliner, we have the details panel. The details panel is essentially where we can edit all the properties of an object that we have selected. For example, maybe if I don't like the scale of this chair right here, I can select the chair and come to scale and maybe increase it by 2 in the Z axis, which is the vertical axis, and see that we have a really long and tall chair. Now, I don't like that edit. It looks kind of weird. So you can always press Ctrl and Z in Unreal Engine to undo anything. Now, we do have one more default window. That's arguably the most important window since it stores everything we're doing. It stores information on the chairs, the table, even the entire world. And that is the content drawer. You can get the content drawer by going all the way down here to the bottom left-hand corner and clicking on content drawer like that to bring it up. Alternatively, since this window is pretty important, you can press Control and Space at the same time to bring it up and close it. So if you press Control and Space, it's going to bring up the content drawer, and this gives us a folder view of all the assets that make up our project. So for example, if we want to see where this chair is being stored and maybe we want to edit the chair, then we can come under Starter Content, Props, and right there we have SM_chair. If I double click on it, we can see the chair asset and make any adjustments if we do need to. Now we're going to go over the static mesh editor later, so I can exit out of this window by clicking on the X icon. I'm going to press Control and Space again to bring back my content drawer, and probably the best example I have for the content drawer is that it's like your computer's file explorer. So just like on your computer where you have folders, and in those folders you have subfolders, and those subfolders contain assets like text files or Word documents, same exact thing with the content drawer in Unreal. So you have folders, and in those folders you have subfolders, and finally you have all those assets that make up your project. So for example, here we have the starter content folder, and I can go into it by double clicking like this, or I can click on it right here within the folder window. Now I could go into any of these different folders. For example, the maps folder contains the map we're currently editing. So we can see up here that this map is called minimal_default. Right there's minimal_default. We can double check that we are editing this map by double clicking on it to open it up. Let's go save. And we can see that it did open up the exact same map. Now, if I ever want to go up a folder, I can always click on here. So right now we're in the maps folder. If I want to get out of that, I can click on starter content. And if I want to get out of that, we can even go to content right there. Now, don't worry, if you don't have starter content, you can click on add and then add feature or content pack, and then go to content and simply select starter content and add a project. I'm not going to do that since we did add it when we were creating our project. As you can guess, the content drawer is a pretty big deal, and maybe you don't want to press Control and Space all the time to bring it up. You always want it docked in your layout. Well, all you have to do is click on docked in layout like this, and now your content drawer will be right here at the bottom. And notice how it's called content browser right now, not called content drawer. So whenever I say content browser and content drawer, just know that I'm talking about the same exact thing. Now, this is great, but this tab right here is taking up a little bit of real estate. If you ever want to get rid of a tab, all you have to do is right click and click on hide tabs. If you want to get back that tab, then you can click on the very small blue triangle and that will bring back your tab. Also, tabs are great because if you left mouse button and hold, you're able to move this around and dock it somewhere else. So maybe if I don't want content browser at the bottom right here, I can dock it to the side, or I can even dock it to one of the tabs right here. And now I'm able to switch in between details and the content browser. Also, if you ever want to move windows around, you can hover in between the windows and then you're able to move it down just like this to adjust exactly how you want your user interface. Now, another neat trick is that if I dock my content browser right here, and let's go make it a little bit smaller, and maybe I don't want it always visible, I can right click and go dock to sidebar. Now, whenever I want my content browser or any other window, I can just click right here and it will show. Now, if I don't want to dock to sidebar, I can right click and unlock from sidebar just like that. Now I'm going to click on the X icon to get rid of that content browser. Alternatively, if I want to automatically dock all my windows in a sidebar except the viewport, I can click on F10, which will go into full screen mode. And now we can see that my outliner and details window, and any other windows I have on the side will go into docked mode. And then I could click on F10 again to bring those windows back. So F10 is a neat shortcut to automatically dock all your windows. Now, these are just the default windows. If you want to see all the windows that are available to us, we can come up to Windows and select any of these. Now, one window that we are going to be using a lot is the world settings. So world settings, as you can guess, just has a bunch of different properties and settings that we can play with to edit the map we currently have opened. Now, for example, what if we really mess up our user interface? It's a different window, default windows. If you want to see all the windows that are available to us, we can come up to Windows and select any of these. Now, one window that we are going to be using a lot is the world settings. So world settings, as you can guess, just has a bunch of different properties and settings that we can play with to edit the map we currently have opened. Now, for example, what if we really mess up our user interface? It's basically unreadable. We have no idea what is happening. Don't worry, we can always come up to Window and all the way down here, go to Load Layout and click on Default Editor Layout, which will just reset all of our windows. Now that we have the very basics of the user interface out of the way, we can move on to the fun stuff, and that is camera navigation. So how to navigate our camera around our 3D world so we can view it at all different angles. To navigate is actually easier than you think. So you want your cursor inside the viewport, and then you want to hold down the right mouse button. If you now move your mouse with the right mouse button held down, you are able to look around your scene. And still, with the right mouse button held down, you're able to use the WASD keys to move around. You can also use E and Q to go up and down. So that's E to go up, Q to go down, W to move forward, S to move backwards, and A and D to move left and right.
Nice.
All the while holding down the right mouse button. If you are not holding down the right mouse button and you try to use WASD, then nothing will happen. So make sure you do hold that down. Now we can also control our camera speed. So let's say, for example, there's an object that's really far away and you want to go towards that object, but your camera is moving too slow. Well, if you come up here to the top right-hand corner and select the camera icon, you're now able to control that speed. So right now we're at 4. We can also bring this up to 6. And now we are a lot faster. And we can bring this all the way down to 1. And we can see that we are pretty slow. So let's leave it at 4. And a shortcut to access camera speed is to, of course, hold down the right mouse button and use the scroll wheel. So scroll wheel up will move faster. And scroll wheel down will move slower. So that's a shortcut. That's how you don't have to come up here and continually play with the camera speed if you do want to move faster or slower. Here's a really good tip. Let's say if you scroll really far away, so you fly really far away from where the bulk of your geometry, where your world is, and then you look around and you can't find your objects anymore. What you can do is come up to any of the objects right here. Let's say, for example, the chair, select that, and then press the F key to focus on that object. So if you select an object, you can press F to then snap to that object, just like this. So that's how you're never lost in your world. So if you ever played any first-person games, you should be right at home since the muscle memory is there for the WASD keys and rotating your camera by moving your mouse. Now, if we press F again to then zoom in onto an object, we can rotate around that object by holding down Alt and the left mouse button. So Alt and left mouse button allows us to rotate around a pivot object. And if we hold down Alt and hold down the right mouse button, we can zoom in and out. So right mouse button, zoom in and out, left mouse button to pivot around that object. And to focus on an object, of course, you want to select it and press the F key just like beforehand. Before we move on, let's briefly go over the viewport controls. So we know the different ways that we can view our world. So up here we have perspective. Let's say if you want a top-down bird's eye view, then we could click on the perspective button and select top like this. So to control in an orthographic view mode, you want to hold down the right mouse button to pan, and of course use a scroll wheel to zoom in and out. So right mouse button pan, scroll wheel to zoom in and out. We can also view it from the side, like maybe the left side, same controls. And of course, if we want to go back into perspective, we come up here, select the button, and click on perspective. Notice how a lot of the buttons in Unreal have a shortcut right next to it. For example, perspective shortcut is Alt and G. So instead of coming all the way up here and selecting perspective in the dropdown, I can just press the Alt and G key at the same time to go back into perspective. So right next to perspective is our view modes. So view modes are pretty great because they allow us to see our world in different ways. For example, maybe we don't want to see all the lights and we just want to see the colors of our world. instead of coming up to lit, I can select unlit right there, or I can even select wireframe to see our world's edges and vertices. We will be changing our view modes a lot since it's a great way to debug our scene and see if there's anything wrong. So I'm going to come back up here to lit, or the shortcuts are Alt-4 for lit, Alt-3 for unlit, and Alt-2 for wireframe. So let's jump back with Alt and 4 to get our default view. And right next to our view modes is the show flags. So show flags allow us to turn on and off different object types. For example, what if I don't want this grid right here at the bottom? Then I can come to show, let's go find where grid is, and uncheck that to hide the grid. Now maybe for some reason you don't want to show our static meshes, and essentially static meshes are all the objects you see right here. Then within the show flags, we can uncheck static meshes, and we no longer see those static meshes. Now, obviously we don't want that, and if you ever mess up your show flags, you can bring back the default flags by clicking on Use Defaults. And keep in mind that we aren't deleting anything with show flags, they just help us see what we want in the viewport. And finally, this is my favorite viewport option, and that is Game View. So if we come up here and click on the button with the 3 lines, we have Game View all the way down here, and we can see that the shortcut is G. Now, if I enable Game View, we're going to see exactly what the player will see in game. So if I press G to untoggle Game View, we can see that we have all these different widgets, and we have the grid right here. And of course, the player won't see the sun widget right here, which controls the sun's rotation. Instead, if we want to see exactly what the game will see, we click on G to hide all those widgets and features that are here for us, the editor. So just know that throughout this tutorial, when you see a bunch of widgets and these widgets just disappear, that's because I toggled on Game View with the G key. Now that we know how to navigate around our world, it's time to go over how to create new objects and move them around. So we're going to go over moving, scaling, and rotating objects. To begin, let's go over simple movement. I'm going to press a G key to get rid of our editor widgets.
Okay,
and now all we see is our world. So to move an object, simply select it, and by default we get the translation or the movement gizmo. To move an object, hover over any of these arrows and hold down the left mouse button. So I'm able to move this chair around, but notice how moving the chair isn't smooth. That's because by default, snapping is turned on. Now you could turn off snapping by coming up here and unchecking the grid icon like that. So now we can smoothly move our objects around. Now I'm going to turn it back on because it's important to know that Unreal uses centimeters. So right now, since there's a 10 right next to the icon, it's snapping every 10 centimeters. We can change this by selecting the number, and in the drop down, let's select 100. So now it's moving every 100 centimeters, which is 1 meter. So every time this chair moves, it moves 1 meter. So that's pretty important to know. Now I'm going to uncheck it because I do want smooth movement. Next up is rotation. So to rotate your object, you want to change its gizmo. To change a gizmo, you want to select one of the buttons up here. So right now it's on translation. Right next to it is rotation. Now I can rotate this chair in all these different axes. We can see that rotation snapping is turned on. If I want to turn that off, then right next to translation snapping, we have this icon right here. Make sure it's not blue. And now we're no longer snapping every 10 degrees. I can press Ctrl Z to undo all those changes. And let's go over scaling. So right next to rotation, we have scaling, and scaling works pretty similar to the rest of the gizmos. All you have to do is hover over any of these squares, hold down the left mouse button, and now we're going to scale in that exact direction. So if we want to turn off scale snapping, of course, just uncheck the icon right there, and now we can smoothly scale. I'll press Ctrl Z a bit because it's important to point out that if I hover my mouse not over one of the individual squares, but the one square that's connecting all of them, so the one in the middle, hold down the left mouse button, I can move my chair and scale it uniformly up and down. So not in any particular axis. So I press Ctrl Z to undo all those. And if we hover over all these buttons, we see that there's shortcuts. So movement is W, rotation is E, and scaling is R. So that means it's W to move, E to rotate, and R to scale. So those are some of the most common shortcuts that we're going to be using consistently throughout our time in Unreal Engine. So again, one last time, it is W to move, E to rotate, and R to scale. I also want to point out that if we want to move our object in the direction of our object, then come up to this little globe icon, select it. That's how it's now a square. And we can see that we're now able to move the object in that object's direction. So move it locally instead of globally. If we want to switch it back to global, then click the square icon again to make it a globe. And now we're moving it in the direction of the world and not that individual object. It's also important to point out that if I press W to get our translation widget, and if I hover over the square that's in between the different axes, I'm able to lock it and move it only in those two axes. So if I hover in between the Y and X axis, I'm just moving it in between those and not in the Z axis. I can also lock it in between the Z and Y axis, just like this. So let's press Control and Z to undo those changes. Now you're probably wondering, how do we create an object in our world? Well, there's a couple ways. Number one is that we can duplicate an object. So with any object selected, for example, this statue, if I press Control and D, then we just duplicate that object. Now, we didn't notice a change. That's because it duplicated it in the same spot as the original object. So if I hold down the left mouse button and move it out of the way, we can see that we did duplicate that object. And within the outliner, there's now a new object called statue 2, which is a copy of the original statue. So let's delete statue 2. And there is an easier way to duplicate. This is the way I duplicate. And that is hovering over an arrow with a translation widget selected and holding down Alt and left mouse button. So hold down both of those and simply drag. And now we're able to easily duplicate and drag an object away.
Oh, really? Alt and drag? Let's try that. Oh. That'll make it way easier. Alt and drag. Now we have more fire. Yeah. That's cool. Fucking fly. Okay. You're gonna put the fire over here. Let's go. So Alt, another one. Boom. Now there's a lot of fire. Boom. Okay.
So let's press Control Z to undo all those changes. Now, another way to create an object is by using the Add tool up here in the toolbar. So for example, let's click on Add, and let's come all the way down here to Shapes, and maybe we want to drag in a sphere, so we drag it in like this, or we can even add in a light, like a point light, and we're able to drag it around in our scene. So let's go delete those. And finally, the last way to add an object is through the content browser. So let's bring up the browser by holding down Control and Space at the same time, pressing both of those, and let's go into Props, and to add an object into the content browser, hold down the left mouse button and drag it into your world. For example, this couch. So let's go move it down just like this. And now we have a brand new object. So by holding down Shift, you can select multiple objects. So for example, if I have my chair on the left selected, and I want to select a chair on the right, if I hold down Shift, now I have them both selected. If I hold down Shift again, I can add in the table and the statue. Now, if I want to deselect an item, all I have to do is hold down Control and click on any items to deselect them. Now all we have is the statue and the left chair selected. And here's another tip. If I have the chair selected, hold down Alt and the left mouse button to drag out a new chair. Let's say if I want to drag this chair all the way over there, then I'm going to have to drag it across the screen, move my camera, drag it across my screen again, and it's just a huge hassle. Another way I can do it is by holding down the Shift while I'm dragging. So if I'm going to hold down the left mouse button on one of these arrows, and I want to lock my camera to the object, simply hold down Shift, and you're able to lock a camera to an object, which can save on a lot of time.
Oh. Oh, nice. Okay.
time. So I'm going to press delete and let's create a very, very simple scene just to get a hang of all the controls. So to begin, I want to hold down shift and let's select these two chairs, hold down alt and duplicate them out. So let go, hold down alt and left mouse button again, alt and left mouse button again. Now let's go rotate some of these chairs. That's how they're facing inwards. So now it's time to go over materials, but do keep in mind that materials can be a little bit complicated, especially if you're brand new to 3D art. So if you do find yourself a little bit lost throughout this course, do keep in mind that you can always go back in a section and rewatch it. To demonstrate materials, I want to create a brand new map. So to do so, let's create a folder where we're going to store all the assets we create. So I want this folder to be under content, right next to the starter content folder. Right click and select a new folder. I'm going to call this folder my stuff and double click to go inside of it. Now to create a
Okay, let's create a folder called my stuff. Under content.
folder where we're going to store all the assets we create. So I want this folder to be under content, right
next to starter content. New folder. My stuff.
next to the starter content folder. Right click and select a new folder. I'm going to call this folder my stuff and double click to go inside of it. Now to create a level, I could right click and under create basic assets, select level, but I want to use a level template since this will just create a completely blank level. So to use level templates, you want to come up to file, new level, and you can select open world or basic. I'm going to select basic.
Okay. File. Open level.
And now we have a file folder, my stuff, and double click to go template since this will just create a completely blank level. So to use level templates, you want to come up to file, new level, and you can select open
Boom.
world or basic. I'm going to select basic. And now we have a pretty basic level. It's just the floor right here and the sky. Now, in order to save this level in a specific location in our content browser, you need to press Control and S. And it's going to ask us where we want to save this level. Select my stuff. And let's call this one material example level. And
Material example level. Save that.
then select save. Now, pressing Control and Space to bring my content drawer, we can see that under my stuff, our level is saved. So if you ever want to go back into this level, I just have to double click and we will open up that level. Now, I do want to make some adjustments. If we zoom in on the floor, we can see that our grid is showing through and it's right on top of the floor. Now, this grid will be distracting when we're showing off materials. So I'm going to come up to show and uncheck the grid to hide it.
Okay. Nice. Can't see no more.
That's all we see is the floor material. Also, I think this floor is a little bit too big for our purposes. So I could use R and hover in between the Y and X axis to then scale it down like this. Or alternatively, within the details panel of this floor, I can set it to 1 in the X axis, 1 in the Y axis, and 1 in the Z axis, just to give us a smaller floor. I also want to add in an object to place our materials on top of, and we can do so by pressing
Um, and how did he make it smaller? Oh, there you go.
controlled space. And Unreal actually comes with a bunch of assets and objects by default. So this is content that is not located in starter content. Instead, it's located in the engine folder. And if you don't see your engine folder right here, that's because you need to come to settings and make sure show engine content is enabled. Now we get access to all of Unreal's default content that is contained in instead not located in starter content. Instead, it's located in the engine folder. And if you don't see your engine folder right here, that's because you need to come to settings and make sure show engine content is
Okay. Show engine settings. Boom. Engine. Oh wow.
enabled. Now we get access to all of Unreal's default content that is contained in every single project. So let's go into content, and I believe it is under engine meshes, and it's specifically SM_map preview mesh.
Engine meshes. Nice.
Now we can also select engine and type in SM_mat to bring up that asset. So I'm going to drag it into our world, and let's rotate it 90 degrees, and we can rotate it 90 degrees exactly by making sure snapping is enabled up here. Now I also want to control the exposure, since if we zoom in on the shadows and zoom out, we can see that auto exposure is enabled right now. So let's create a post-process volume by going to volumes, post-process, simply dragging it out. I want this to affect the entire world, not just whatever is inside this box. So scroll down and make sure infinite extend bound is turned on. Now if we go up here under exposure, make sure metering mode is set to manual instead of auto, and exposure compensation, we can bring this up. I found a value of 11 to be pretty good. Now, as a reminder, if your exposure isn't changing from your post-process volume, you need to make sure that inlit game setting is turned on, because otherwise it's going to default to EB100 setting right here as the exposure amount. So make sure game view is turned on. That's how we're using post-process volume. And since I do like my scene right now, you want to make sure to save everything with Control and S. And actually, I think I'm going to bring down my exposure to, let's leave it at 10.5. So now it's finally time to go over materials. And adding a material to your world is actually pretty simple. So
I think I need to slow it down a bit.
press Control space to thing use here. If you're on, scroll down and make sure infinite extend bound is turned on.
Reflections. Why do I keep getting...
Now, if we go the exposure, since if we zoom in on the shadows and zoom out, we can see that auto exposure is enabled right now. So let's create a post process volume by going to volumes, post process,
Volumes, post process.
simply dragging it out, post process volume by going to volume.
No, no, no.
Post process, simply dragging it out. I want this to affect the entire world, not just whatever is inside this box. So scroll down and make sure infinite extend bound is
Mm, don't see that. What the fuck?
Is turned on. Now, if we go up here under exposure, make sure metering mode is set to manual instead of
Uh,
auto. Make sure infinite extend bound is turned on.
Replication.
Now, if we go up world volumes, not just whatever is inside this box. So scroll down and make sure infinite extend
Mm-hmm.
bound is turned on. Now, if we go up here under exposure, make sure
Exposure.
metering mode is set to manual instead of auto, and exposure compensation, we can bring this up. I found a value of 11 to be pretty good. Now, as a reminder, if your exposure isn't changing from your post-process volume, you need to make sure that in lit, game setting is turned on, because otherwise it's going to default to, and hold down Alt again, press E, and I want to make sure snapping is turned.
God damn it.
Material. It's very important to.
What?
Now it's time to fixes. I love. Let's see. And it's going to if you're double to the so now we have our. So now it's finally time to go. It's turned on. That's how we're using post-process volume. Isn't changing from your post-process volume. You need to make sure that in lit game setting is turned on, because otherwise it's going to default to EV100 setting right here as the exposure amount. So make sure game view is turned on. That's how we're using post-process volume. And since I do like my scene right now, you want to make sure to save everything with Control and S. And actually, I think I'm going to bring down my exposure to, let's leave it at 10.5. So now it's simple. So press Control Space, and luckily starter content comes with a bunch of materials by default under the materials folder. So let's double click into materials, and we see we have a bunch of materials that we can use. So to add a material to our
Starter content.
bunch of materials by default under the materials folder. So let's double click into materials, and we see we have a bunch of materials that we can use. So to add a material to our world, you want to simply hold down the left mouse button and drag it until you're hovering over whatever object you want this material to be placed on, and let go. It is that simple. So now we have
What? Is it that easy? That's crazy. That's fucking cool.
We have a brick floor, or for example, to make this object steel, I can drag a steel material onto the object and let go. We can even add grass right there like this. And we can see the reflections updates.
Hello, my love. You okay? What's going on? Hmm? What's all that crying I heard? I should have did this earlier.